I supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, but he's trash. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and although there's all sorts of people out there who legitimately believe that I'm some sort of far-right channel now, seemingly due to the fact that the left is unanimously composed of corporatists, the far left, and I guess Tulsi Gabbard. Well, because of that, people should know that they can look for themselves at my early videos to see whether or not I once considered myself a leftist. And you can also see me saying almost 3 years ago that I was, in fact, a Sanders supporter very strongly and very openly. However, times change, and due to the fact that I am certainly not a Democrat, haven't voted for a single Republican in my life, and also cannot see absolutely any purpose in trying to help push our national and international political Overton window any further left in the West, I now consider myself some sort of centrist, and much more potently, it should be known that I simply don't support Sanders any longer. Now, granted, I realize this might be extremely disappointing to some of the old members of my audience who were with me from the beginning, but the fact of the matter is that I supported Sanders and never went towards supporting Clinton because I do not vote defensively, and if I did, I probably would have voted for Trump. But really, the main thing to keep in mind about this video is that I'm thinking of this in terms of honesty, both mine and of the candidates. And while I remember once seeing Sanders as the most honest guy out there, I simply don't think so anymore.
Today we talk about justice, and today we talk about racism. And I must tell you, it gives me no pleasure to tell you that we now have a president of the United States who is a racist.
To be perfectly truthful, I can't remember any longer whether or not Sanders actually attacked Trump as being some sort of a racist during the last election, because all I remember was his campaign against Clinton. But personally, as far as I know, the white supremacists have been rather disappointed with Trump for a wide variety of reasons. And the whole racism allegation seems to be entirely manufactured from the tail end of the intensive Obama-era smear campaigns against any Republican.
Well, it made almost no headlines, and yet a major piece of legislation was quietly signed into law a little over a week ago. President Obama signed a bill that allows the U.S. government to combat foreign propaganda by creating its own. Let's take a look and give it a reality check.
You see, after the corporate left blue checkmark media oppressor class in our nation was born, these people used allegations of racism, sexism, and eventually transphobia and Islamophobia as their primary weapons by the end of 2016. So when Sanders goes on to claim that
We have a president of the United States who has done something that no other president in modern history has done. What a president is supposed to do is to bring us together. And we have a president intentionally, purposely, is trying to divide us up by the color of our skin, by our gender, by the country we came from, by our religion.
when he says that stuff, I know he's entirely full of crap because I have a personal memory longer than 5 years, and I remember the intensity of the race-baiting insanity that started as soon as Trayvon Martin was killed. And I assure you, even people from the far left didn't understand why everybody was making such a big deal out of that one specific black teenager who wasn't killed by a white person or a cop anyway. And even if you don't have a very good memory, you can look through all of the race-baiting articles that came out starting in 2012 or 2013 and ever since. Why did Obama start the race-baiting? Well, it was obviously to distract everybody from the horrors of what he did to the economy, not to mention the secret wars and assassinating of United States citizens that he participated in. Which, of course, brings me back to Sanders. You see, what I have admitted in the past, and I'll admit again, is that the reason I endorsed Sanders in 2016 was because of my own pure ignorance about the economy. Because I kept hearing Sanders say,
And while the middle class continues to disappear, over the last 2 years, just as an example, the wealthiest 15 Americans in this country, 15 people, and that includes Bill Gates, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, and a bunch of others. These guys have seen their wealth increase by $170 billion. That's just an increase in what they previously had in a 2-year period. To put this in perspective, that increase in wealth for the top 15 Americans is more wealth than is owned by the bottom 40% of our people.
He'd say it over and over in a similar way each and every time.
As a nation, are we satisfied with the reality that today the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%?
However, I realize now that he was saying these things in a very fine-tuned way for a very specific reason that entirely went over my head in 2016 due to the fact that I was a diehard leftist that literally thought that Republicans were evil and didn't care if I died and maybe hopefully burnt in hell because I was a gay man. You see, as a leftist, I also had no idea about the state of the economy. Granted, deep down I knew that our overall economy took the biggest nosedive under Obama as it did under any president, and I knew this because I lived in San Francisco and visited both Seattle and New York City during the 2016 campaign, and even though all three of those places are supposed to be some of the richest cities in the country, it was quite clear that housing was totally unaffordable and that there was a homelessness crisis everywhere. Still, I just figured that if the top 1/10 of 1% was getting richer, that must mean that somehow they are hoarding all of their wealth or something, as opposed to realizing that the wealth increases being confined to a small section of the populace was probably a sign that the overall economy wasn't doing so hot, which apparently was the case. So, yeah, having the realization that Sanders was totally feeding into a childish assumption that I had once harbored about our economy being this immortal machine that would never fail under any circumstances, well, having that realization is what sealed the deal that would make it so that I would not be supporting the guy any longer. And, of course, it didn't help when people started pointing things out, like the fact that he owned 3 houses. And of course, nobody should forget the fact that he supported Hillary Clinton in the end after everything she put him and his supporters through. And for the record, I am having trouble deciding whether or not she is worse than Obama because it's really hard to tell. As, let's be honest, when you think about the fraud that Obama engaged in merely to get elected in the first place, he very likely did rival Clinton in pure nightmarish crookedness.
Now here's where it gets really interesting and why I have absolutely no faith in the Republican Party except for a few brave people. The Pigford was supposed to be over, and Barack Obama gets confronted by the scam artist that runs the Black Farmers, the National Black Farmers Association, and he says that there are 72,500 late filers that we need to be brought in, and they say, look, there are only 18,000 black farmers in the country. This thing was supposed to be over. If you've ever been in a lawsuit and you paid $100,000 and you said, okay, bye, and the judge says it's over, what Barack Obama did was open the case up again. He was the sole sponsor. He was the sole sponsor when the corrupt guy that runs the Black Farmers Association, who fakes that he's a doctor and who's getting paid under the table by the class action attorneys who are making hundreds of millions of dollars off of this. The people who got screwed originally, you know how I said there were 157 black farmers? they lost their farms. Their case got hijacked by the Congressional Black Caucus and the class action attorneys. And I started calling up the original people, and they said, we've been trying to tell the Republicans this for years. We've been trying to tell CNN and Fox News and everyone else for years that our legitimate case was hijacked. We lost our properties. The farmers that I know, like Jimmy Dismuke and Abraham Carpenter and Eddie Slaughter and Lucius Abrams, lost their farms and now have money being taken out of their Social Security checks. But they look around them and their neighbors who work at Best-Buy and who are mechanics or police officers or even work for the USDA, who were the discriminators in this case, they got $50,000 checks, okay? It's probably 99% fraud, and we even went into the churches where they were teaching people how to defraud the government and caught them on tape teaching people how they could get their $50,000 check. We caught them dead to rights, okay? And you go to Washington, D.C., and you say, we caught them. We have affidavits from an FBI investigation that was diverted from the Justice Department because, oh, we don't want to touch on race in this country. Wait a sec, this is 99% fraud, and the actual black farmers want to go testify about how they got screwed over. You'd be helping the salt of the earth. Black farmers who wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to bed at 9 o'clock, but instead it's been hijacked by trial lawyers that fuel the Democratic Party. The Congressional Black Caucus knows about this, and it was all done so that the Congressional Black Caucus and Democrats could win the black vote in the rural South. And we have the letter why Barack Obama, who had no history of sponsoring anything, was the sole sponsor of Pigford, was because, according to a letter that we have, he was told, if you sign on to Pigford, we can win the rural black South for you. And that's exactly what happened. You remember when Bill Clinton lost it, when Hillary lost in South Carolina? It was because Barack Obama had jiu-jitsued the Clintons, who had invested so much time trying to be the first African-American presidency, and he absolutely undermined it, and they've wielded the United States Treasury in order to pay billions upon billions of dollars, $2.7 billion so far, and right now, because we exposed it and nobody would do anything about it except for Congressman King and Michelle Bachmann, they're the only ones that will go out there and stick their necks out there. And Congressman King just put up a resolution this week, or last week, in which he said, let's stop the funding of this and let's investigate it. And Darrell Issa voted against it, okay? I've lost my faith in the Republican Party, and what we were told by Congressman King is they know it's fraud, but they're all afraid of being called racist. That's what they were told. They're afraid of being racist. And even...
Let's be clear. I imagine a lot of people on the right or center are worried that Sanders is going to be a serious contender this time around. But I see no possibility of that, because the intersectional feminists are already attempting to sabotage his candidacy with #MeToo allegations. So clearly, he'll be the victim of starving piranha syndrome even worse than he was last time. Because if they're already attacking him, this means that the corporate intersectional feminist high council has deemed him officially disqualified.
Lastly, I want to ask you about an article that was published in the New York Times today. In it are allegations describing episodes of sexual harassment and demeaning treatment, as well as pay disparity in your 2016 campaign. I'm wondering, were you aware of those allegations during the campaign? And if you do run into 2020, how can you ensure something like that doesn't happen again?
Good question. And the answer is, Anderson, I'm very proud of the campaign we ran in 2016. You know, we started at 4% of the polls. We ended up winning 22 states, 13.
So you're saying that you're proud of how you did everything? You're saying that women should just go shut their mouths and go back to the kitchen? You're saying that even though you're almost 80 years old, you should be president ahead of a woke intersectional like Kamala Harris or Kirsten Gillibrand? Nope. Don't you know that the intersectional left, which is seemingly the unified orthodoxy of Western multinational corporations, is unanimously composed of feminists, right? This means that if they already came after you with everything they had last time, and you all but were called a misogynist for daring to run against Hillary Clinton, don't you think the same crap will happen to you this time, but even worse? Clearly, the intersectional gloves are already off, as last time they assumed that they'd get their candidate in without even trying, but they still treated the other guys so horribly. So this time, when the intersectionals are so dead set on getting a woman into office that they'll throw allegations against Sanders, how do you think Sanders will fare if this is his track record when it comes to standing up to bullies?
Moments later, Black Lives Matter activists rushed the stage.
We are trying. We're gonna let you on the mic.
Activists who last year shut down a holiday tree lighting in the same park today prevented the most progressive candidate for president from speaking to thousands of people who came to hear him.
I don't know. I still think I'd prefer Sanders to Clinton. Like, that's a contest. But what I will say is that one of the biggest reasons I was scared of Trump being elected was that I thought he'd be anti-gay male. But of course, as soon as he got into office, he didn't seem so bad, as he said he wouldn't be pursuing a reversal of the gay marriage decision, not to mention the fact that I soon after learned that Trump was introduced to the Republican Party by an organization called Go Proud, which was a gay conservative group. Thus, I have to say, in terms of my own fears as an individual, while all sorts of people will say that Trump hates the gays because he doesn't capitulate to the same types of transgender entitlements that Obama gave and Trudeau is giving in Canada, I want to make it explicitly clear that I am more afraid of the socially and legally oppressive transgender lobby infringing upon people's liberties in the United States with mandatory pronoun enforcement and further expanding monopolization of LGBT media and nonprofits than I am of Republicans. Honestly, the intersectionals have wreaked absolute havoc in every aspect of every city I've visited, while the Republicans are mostly fairly friendly and open-minded. And since most of the pronoun policing and hate crime technicalities seem to simply be weapons that intersectional feminists have adopted for political leverage, claiming to be protecting transgender people, well, I'm perfectly happy to say that I really don't care about them. And since Trump doesn't hate gay guys, I'll take my chances with him ahead of a Democrat, though I'm not gonna vote for him. Though, hey, maybe Tulsi Gabbard will be great, but I don't know, it's hard to really want to side with that party at all, because even if Tulsi was really good, who'd she be working with? I don't know. So, sorry, Bernie, but if I will be supporting any Democrat, it'll probably be Tulsi. If you found this video helpful for your 2020 election decision, please consider donating to me on PayPal or subscribing to me on Subscribestar, which I just signed up to. You could be the first person, and you could do that over there at /Prince of Queens. And make sure to check out my video about Kamala Harris as well, because I thought it was kind of funny, but I did it a few months ago. And I think I'll be doing a whole series devoted to DNC candidates that I'll make into a playlist. Thanks a bunch.